Welcome back, fellow scientists. I'm super excited to get to do another video with you today. So before we begin, let's kind of review what we've been talking about. We, in past videos, talked about how photosynthesis occurs by plants and bacteria and algae taking energy from the sun and then turning it into sugar, and then how that sugar can be used by different organisms and can be used in respiration, in cellular respiration. And then we kind of took that to a little bit bigger picture and looked at energy and how it flows through ecosystems in the previous video. You guys looked through the lens of ecology. Well, we're going to continue looking through the lens of ecology today. However, instead of looking at energy, we're going to look at matter. And the big idea with the video that you guys watched before was that energy flows. It flows from point A to point B, from a primary producer to a consumer. And that was the key idea, was that energy flows. Matter doesn't flow. Matter cycles. And so I want you guys to write that down. Matter cycles. All right. And these cycles are called biogeochemical cycles. Why do you think that is such a long name? Why do you think of that? It has all of those parts. Well, it has all of those parts because in these cycles, there are biological processes, which are processes that occur in living things, like photosynthesis or cellular respiration. Processes. There's geological processes that occur. And this would be like when rocks weather, okay, or like volcanoes erupt, and due to the intense heat, it can actually change the form of the matter. Or chemical processes, and chemical processes occur when different chemicals, different substances come in contact with each other and can change. Okay. So the most common process that you guys have talked about or know about, most common cycle, not process, cycle, is the water cycle. So let's go back to elementary school for a minute and we're going to review the water cycle. So this is the water cycle. And if you remember, water, let's say we start with water vapor here in the atmosphere, right? And that water vapor condenses into clouds, and then those clouds rain or precipitate down to the earth, and so as rain or snow, precipitation falls to the earth, and then it is infiltrated into the earth or absorbed into the soil. And then some of it can be taken up into plants, and then some of it can be as runoff, go into lakes and streams. It can be drank by animals. So it moves around the terrestrial biosphere that way, right? And then to go back into the atmosphere to kind of finish off the water cycle, it is either transpired off of plant leaves or it is evaporated back into the atmosphere. So that's the basic water cycle, and we've all talked about that, right? We learned that in like 2nd grade. So that's the most common matter cycle that we know about. Well, today I want to introduce to you guys a different matter cycle, and this cycle that I want to talk about is, drumroll, the carbon cycle. So why are we interested in carbon? Well, because carbon is the background of life. We go back to chapter 1. Carbon is in all living things, right? And since we've been talking about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, they play key roles in the carbon cycle. So let's go down here to our little image. It doesn't want to stay. Let's see if we can get it to stay. There we go. So this is the carbon cycle. So let's label this carbon cycle. So carbon can be found in a lot of different forms, but it is kind of commonly known. We talk about it, and it is most readily usable as the CO2. Okay, and CO2 is found in the atmosphere, so we have it right here. You can see CO2. It's also in the atmosphere as CH4, which is methane, but in much smaller amounts. There's much larger amounts of CO2 than there is methane, and so it exists like that in the atmosphere. Okay. So as I said, it exists as CO2 and CH4 in the atmosphere, and it can come down into the terrestrial biosphere in several ways. The first way is through dissolving directly into bodies of water, like oceans, lakes, that are standing still, so it can just dissolve immediately, and it dissolves in the form of carbonic acid, and actually that's what makes oceans more acidic. And you may have heard in the news that the acidity of the oceans is rising, and as a result aquatic life is being harmed, specifically corals. That's been kind of a hot topic lately. But yeah, so CO2 can be directly absorbed into bodies of water. It also enters the terrestrial biosphere through photosynthesis. Oops, I somehow unclicked my pen, so let's go back here. Okay, so through photosynthesis. And we just talked about this process. So plants can take the CO2 and then they can convert the carbon in the CO2 into sugar. And then that sugar is eaten and consumed by other organisms, and it can be used for cellular respiration, can be used for building blocks of life and other processes that those organisms go through. And so in that way, carbon can then be moved throughout the biosphere. Carbon is also stored, as you can see, in sediments, in rocks. A lot of rocks have calcium carbonate, which has carbon in it, inorganic form of carbon. As you can see, it can be stored as fossil fuels, and fossil fuels are when like organic carbon is like trapped, and so it can't decompose anymore, and it like fossilizes and it becomes a fossil fuel. That's what a fossil fuel is. And so that's how carbon is kind of moved around and stored in the terrestrial biosphere. And so then how it gets back into the atmosphere, because this is a cycle, that's what we're talking about, is through multiple ways. The main way that I want to talk to you about is through respiration, which is, we just talked about that, right? So bacteria in the soil, here you can see, respire, and so CO2 is released back in the atmosphere. It's also respired by plants, and we often forget that plants go through cellular respiration as well, but they do. So plants respire, animals respire, so all living organisms respire, and CO2 is moved back into the atmosphere. Now, kind of a hot topic right now, as you guys have been probably witnessing as listening to the news, watching TV, hearing your parents talk, and things like that, is through like the burning of fossil fuels releases CO2, the burning of biomass, so deforestation where large amounts of trees or grass are being burned releases CO2 back into the atmosphere. You can kind of see how altered land use. So when I said deforestation, they cut the trees down and then they use the land for like growing other things, and that alters the flux of carbon as well. And so people are, you know, they say that that's what's causing global warming, and it is partially true. There's a lot of carbon that humans are releasing into the atmosphere, and it's a problem. So as we look at this, that is the cycle. So we have carbon in the atmosphere, is then brought down into the terrestrial biosphere through either dissolving or through photosynthesis, and then is respired back out into the atmosphere. So that is what we are covering today, was the carbon cycle. And there's other matter cycles as well. Nitrogen and phosphorus are also cycled, and ecologists study those in depth as well, but we're not going to go quite into that much detail. So I wanted you guys to mainly focus on the carbon cycle. I thank you so much for listening to me today, and I will see you on the flip side.